Melbourne, where I'm going to have a chat with Liberal Senator James Paterson. You might remember him, apart from the fact he's the youngest senator in the Parliament. He gave that very interesting maiden speech where he talked about 18C, which I note is now back on the agenda. He wants to talk about that BCA attack and a few things. Senator Paterson, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you, Janine. Thank you for having me.
Firstly, I'm just going to bring up the 18C issue. Again, it was an issue you brought up in your maiden speech back in March. It's now back on the agenda. What hope do you have now? Well, actually, before I get you to answer, let's remind people what former Prime Minister Tony Abbott said about this at the weekend.
After the successful prosecution of Andrew Bolt, I promised to repeal it in its current form. But, as you know, I reneged after fierce criticism from Liberal premiers and a wall of opposition in the Senate. As well, I was seeking ways to limit jihadi hate preachers and worried about the appearance of double standards. Perhaps the cause of free speech would have fared better if my government's initial bid had been merely to drop, offend and insult, while leaving prohibitions on the more serious harms.
Well, that would have been music to your ears, no doubt, and it's reignited the debate. What hope do you have of seeing any movement on this?
Well, Janine, I think we're closer than we ever have been to passing 18C reform through the Parliament and particularly the Senate. My assessment is we are only 1 or 2 votes away from where we need to be in the Senate. And the right bill, well crafted, with the right approach, has a very good prospect of passing this Parliament. And I think if the government takes it up, as I hope it will and as I'm advocating that it do so, then I think we'll get very close to getting this done.
So you're quite hopeful that Malcolm Turnbull will give in to the pressure on this one and agree to the bill?
Well, I don't think it's a question of giving into the pressure. I think the Prime Minister has spoken about his support for freedom of speech in the past. He said that he'd be quite comfortable with a bill such as Bob Day's private members bill, which does take out insult and offend from the Act. So I think it's a question of him taking up the mantle and leading on this, and I think if he does so, it'll be very warmly welcomed.
OK, now let's get to leadership. I know you want to talk today about the BCA, business leadership or lack of it. Your counterpart, or the head of the Victorian Liberal Party, Michael Kroger, was very scathing about the BCA. This followed comments from BCA Chief or Chair Catherine Livingstone today. She had this to say in the Australian Financial Review in an interview with Jenny Hewitt. She said, business needs consistency of message coming from political leadership. It doesn't need to be caught in the crossfire in a partisan way such that it ends up collateral damage from an ongoing conversation which appears just as if the election hasn't finished. Who's right in this one? Has Catherine Livingstone got a point or is Michael Kroger correct?
Well, business leaders often campaign and complain about the lack of political leadership on issues, but frankly I think their own performance in this area leaves a bit to be desired. I don't think they've been well served at all by the Business Council of Australia. I can't remember a public policy battle that they've won in the public debate in the last decade, and I think frankly they've been way too hands-off in public debate. I saw the head of the BCA say today that the BCA doesn't and won't campaign. Well, unions campaign and environmental groups campaign and social justice organisations campaign, and if the BCA isn't going to campaign, then they're going to continue to lose and their members are going to continue to suffer because of it.
But of course this is the dilemma. Business chiefs decided that they would use the BCA. It would be their version of a top end of town union so that they didn't have to put themselves in the firing line. So that's the BCA's role.
Yes, and I think there are Liberals who are asking the question that after the most recent election campaign where we offered the biggest corporate tax cuts in memory, that if the business community and the BCA is not going to get off the mat for that and campaign for that, what are they going to campaign for? I mean, if you ask the average business leader to sign up to a full-page newspaper ad on same-sex marriage or climate change, they'll beat you away with their chequebook. But if you ask them to sign up to a full-page ad on industrial relations reform, they'll be running for the hills. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have these reform issues we have, because we haven't had enough business leaders, and particularly the BCA, out there advocating for the reform that we need.
Well, it's interesting you mention why we have reform issues. One reason would be that your party doesn't seem to be completely unified on it. We've had the GST debate kicked off again by Malcolm Turnbull at the weekend, and just tonight we've had Senator Erica Betts sign something with the Tasmanian senators saying that they don't want any changes to the GST arrangements to the states. Where do you stand on this, and how on earth is Malcolm Turnbull going to push something through when you're not united? And how can you attack the BCA if you don't know what you're doing yourselves?
Well, I strongly back the Prime Minister on GST reform. He's absolutely right that Western Australia has got a raw deal and that reform is necessary. I mean, it is a joke that a state could be getting just 30 cents in the dollar back on the GST that they pay. And I have to say, as a Victorian, a state which has always been a net donor to other states throughout the history of federation, that I wouldn't mind seeing a floor price, not just for Western Australia, but for all states, as the Prime Minister's proposed.
And Senator Abetz and his Tasmanian colleagues?
Well, look, I do understand where they're coming from, but I have to say I don't think Tasmania's best interests are served by being subsidised or bailed out by the rest of the country. Unfortunately, if you pay Tasmania to run its own economy in a way in which it can't itself, then it will encourage the kind of behaviour we've seen from Tasmania, which has been generally, over a span of history, not doing the kind of reforms that are necessary, not having the kind of private sector growth and productivity that it needs. I mean, Tasmanians are entitled to lock up the entire state if they like to be in a national park and a forest, but they can't expect everyone else to pay for that privilege.
Quite right. Senator Paterson, thank you for your time tonight.
Great to be with you, Janine. Thank you.